Hello Year 11, I'm going to be going through some questions on histograms today. This is a higher tier topic only, so if you're doing foundation, you don't need to worry about histograms. And it tends to be on the calculator paper. However, you may get an easier question on a non-calculator paper and you may be expected to do some multiplying, dividing, and so on without your calculators. For today, I'm just going to look at some calculator questions. So a few key things you need to know about histograms. The first is that they are always used for continuous data. So this is things that you can measure, like your height, your weight, the length of something, as opposed to bar charts, which are generally used for discrete data. So the number of hairs on your head, how many siblings you have, how many goals you've scored in a football match, and so on. Unlike bar charts, in histograms, the bars can be different widths, although they might not always be, and you generally should find that there isn't any gaps between your bars unless you're missing some data. The y-axis on a histogram gives you your frequency density, which is different to your frequency, and if you're drawing a histogram, you must label the frequency density to get full marks. And then the area of each bar is equal to the frequency of that group, but that's only true at GCSE. At A level, it does get a little bit more complicated than that, but we'll not worry about that today. So you've got two formulae that come from this fact, and it's worth memorizing either one or both. If you only memorize one, you can get the other one by rearranging it. The first one is that your frequency is equal to your frequency density times your class width. And that makes sense if you think about that the area of a bar or the area of a rectangle is generally the height times the width, or the base times the height. Well, your height here will be your frequency density and your width will be what's called the class width. And then if you rearrange that, you can work out your frequency density. So I'm just dividing through here by class width, which gives me frequency density equals frequency times class width. So let's have a look at a couple of questions that you might get. So the first one is going to ask us to fill in missing information. So I'm told that the table shows information about the time and seconds taken for some people to complete a puzzle. You'll notice that I've got some missing data here, and then in my histogram I've also got some missing data. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of working out here. So in part A, it says use the information in the table to complete the histogram. So I'm going to focus on the information that I've got in both my table and my histogram, and that appears to be this group here. So this group here, the 35 to 40 group, has a frequency of 42, and I can see I've got that bar there. So straight away I know that that area is equal to 42. So I'm going to go ahead and just write that inside my bar. And I also know that I can work out my frequency density using this formula up here, which I have incorrectly written out. So let me just rewrite that there. So frequency density is equal to frequency divided by class width. So that's exactly what I'm going to do to work out the frequency density of that first group. I'm just going to say frequency density is equal to the frequency, which is 42 in this case, divided by the class width, which is just the width of the bars, and that is 5 because it's going from 35 to 40. And again, you can do this in your head, but if you've got the calculator, you might as well use it. That's going to give me a frequency density of 8.4. So that is the height of my bar, or what I'm going to write at the top there. So that's going to be 8.4. So looking at my y-axis, I can see straight away that each of these sort of big blocks of boxes is equivalent to 1. I'll not label every single one, but just so you've got a rough idea, that then means that that one would be 8, and that would be 8.4. So I'm going to use that in the next step. I'm going to want to fill in my table here. So looking at the next step there, I know that my frequency is equal to my frequency density times my class width. So now that I know the scale here, I can work out the frequency density of this bar. So that's 5, and that's 6. My frequency density therefore is 6, and my class width again is 5. So that means that the frequency of that missing bar is 30. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. And then the next bit tells me to use the histogram to complete the table. So I'm going to have to basically fill in these other bars. So what I'm going to do here, and I would highly recommend you do the same, is to create a third column and label it your frequency density. I already know the frequency density for those two, so I'm going to go ahead and fill them in. That's 8.4, and that was 6. And then to work out my frequency density, again, I'm always going to do frequency divided by class width. So for this first one, I'm going to do 12 divided by my class width from 10 to 25. 25 take 10 is 15. So I'm going to work that out in a moment. Here I've got a frequency density of 28 divided by my class width from 25 to 35 of 10. And then here I've got a frequency of 9 divided by my class width, again, of 15. So I'll go ahead and use my calculator for these. You're welcome to do it in your head if you prefer. 12 divided by 15 is equal to 0.8. 28 divided by 10 I know is 2.8. And 9 divided by 15 is equal to 3/5 or 0.6. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to my histogram. Use a ruler if you have one, and use a pencil if you can, because then you can rub it out if you go wrong. I'm going to use a pen, but mine is erasable. So for the first one, I've got class width of 10 to 25 and a frequency density of 0.8. Now bearing in mind that that's 1, 0.8 would be just one small box below that. So I'm going to go from 10 to 25 and just draw that in as clearly as I can. You don't have to shade this in. That is good enough to get you the mark for that first one. The next one goes from 25 to 35. So next big block there, and the frequency density is 2.8. So that's 2, and then 0.8 would just be 2, 4, 6, 8. So up there, it's going to make a little line for myself so I know where to go from. And then connect that in. And then the very last one goes from 45 to 60, so all the way along here, and the frequency density is 0.6. So again, each of these little boxes is 0.2, so 0.6 would be 3 up. And then just before I finish, I'm going to double check that everything is labeled. They've already labeled the time for me, but they haven't put a label for frequency density. So I'm going to write that in to ensure I get full marks. Remember, with a histogram, the y-axis is always labeled as your frequency density. So there you go. There's your completed histogram.